You're listening to The Luxury Item, the podcast on the business of luxury and the people and companies that are shaping the future of the luxury industry. Here's your host, Scott Kerr.
Cigar smoking has been a pleasant diversion, often an ingrained habit for politicians, movie stars, and a host of other famous partakers. Stogies have been a common companion of Robert Downey Jr., Leonardo DiCaprio, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Michael Jordan, Jay-Z, Jack Nicholson, Danny DeVito, Matthew McConaughey, and Andy Garcia. Even Jennifer Lopez keeps a Dunhill humidor in her home that can house up to 80 cigars. Cigars have been a cultural cornerstone in places like Cuba and the Dominican Republic and has become a symbol of wealth and success. The purchase power of consumer cigars continues to increase. Cigar production requires more investment than ordinary cigarettes. Therefore, the price of cigars is relatively high, especially for handmade big cigars. And it seems the cigar market is growing at a nice, healthy clip. According to a recent analysis, the worldwide market for cigars is expected to grow at a CAGR of roughly 2.5% over the next 5 years. However, the cigar market is not without its challenges. Recently, the Cuban-based cigar monopoly, Habanos S.A., announced cigar sales topped over $500 million in 2019, about a 2% increase over 2018. Spain, China, Germany, and France leading the way as the strongest markets. While the profits may have increased in the country, Cuba is still suffering a cash shortage amid U.S. sanction and travel restrictions. Those in the U.S. can still buy cigars in Cuba and take them back, but cannot sell them. On top of that, the coronavirus outbreak in China and around the world could make it very challenging for cigar sales. My guest today on the Luxury Item podcast is here to talk about the cigar business and help sort all of this out. David Savona is executive editor of Cigar Aficionado magazine. David has been writing for Cigar Aficionado since 1995 and became executive editor in 2014. He is probably one of the world's foremost experts on cigars. Cigar Aficionado magazine, which is owned by M. Shanken Communications, has been around since 1992 and positions itself as the definitive lifestyle magazine for men. Aside from cigars, the print publication and its accompanying website focus on luxury lifestyle topics such as golf, travel, alcohol, and accessories. Cigar Aficionado also sponsors events such as the Big Smoke, the premier event for cigar smokers in the United States. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Scott. Very nice to be here.
I was just reading recently that you had just come back. I think I was speaking to your assistant, and you had just come back from Cuba from the Habano Cigar Festival, which, gets over like 2,000 attendees from around the world to really celebrate the cigar culture. What is that like?
It's a tremendous show. It's a lot of fun. It gathers people from all over the world who either sell, distribute, or just enjoy Cuban cigars. A week-long event with several dinners, factory tours, cigar factory tours, tours of tobacco plantations, and really a chance just to meet people who are experts in the world of Cuban cigars and people who are just interested in Cuban cigars. So it's quite an affair.
So how much of it is business and how much of it is pleasure?
Pleasurable business, if I may say. It is a lot of fun to be there and to experience Cuba. Most of it's centered in Havana, which is a great tourist city. Right. But there is a lot of work that gets done.
Have you gone every year?
I've gone every year for the past several years.
Yeah.
I've been to Cuba about 15, 16 times.
Right. What are some of the changes that you've seen there, not only in the country, but how the cigar market has changed, the Cuban cigar market?
It's changed quite a bit. In recent years, you've noticed a lack of certain high-profile cigars. There's some cigars where you just can't get, even in Cuba, which is one of the greatest places in the world to buy Cuban cigars. So certain sizes of Cohibas are just not available. Cohiba Bejiques, which is one of the most sought-after cigars in the world. We named the Bejique BHK 52 Cigar of the Year back in 2010. Can't get them. And it's a cigar that sells for about 3 times the price of a typical Cuban Cohiba. So things like that are in short supply. Some of the bigger cigars are in short supply. That's one of the more recent occurrences. And you're seeing fewer Americans now, given the new view on Cuba by the current administration.
Does the topic of the trade embargo come up?
It comes up a lot.
So what do they say? What is the overall sentiment there?
Everyone wants a change. Everyone in Cuba is hoping for a change. But they've been saying that since I started going. My first trip was in 1996. Right. So there's been hope from the Cuban people that the embargo will end. We got sort of close under the Obama administration, but now we've kind of taken a step backward to old policies. And it's a shame, in my opinion. The Cuban people are lovely people. They embrace Americans, are very friendly to American visitors, and they really know there's a difference between their feelings for Americans and the hostilities between the two governments. So I just on behalf of my thoughts for the Cuban people, I would love to see the embargo ended.
You were just saying that you go to the cigar factories. What is that like?
It's a wonderful experience. If you love a cigar, you walk in, the first thing that happens as you're going through those doors, you smell this beautiful tobacco because there's bales and bales of tobacco being turned by hand into cigars. And then you watch the craftsmanship. You watch these masters taking tobacco leaves and turning them into cigars. It's an artisanal process, hasn't changed in more than centuries. And they're vibrant places. There's a lot of activity. Sometimes there's a lector at a podium reading news of the day. There's the sound of the chivettas, the steel knives they use to cut the tobacco. It's a very cool experience.
They're all family-owned businesses, right?
They once were. Now they're all property of the state. In Cuba, they're all owned by the state and are run by the Cuban government. So there were once, before the revolution, there were individual factories that had house styles and were basically private businesses that competed against one another. Now they're all working for the same team. So
it's really hard to disrupt the Cuban cigar business at this point if it's all run by the state.
It's all run by the state. Yeah, it is a bit of a shame.
So I'm not a big cigar expert. What has always been the allure of a Cuban cigar? And are they different or better than ones from Nicaragua or the Dominican Republic? So I think you recently rated, was it one from Nicaragua as the best cigar?
Absolutely. Our current cigar of the year is a Nicaraguan cigar, the Aging Room Nicaragua Cuatro Maestro. So sometimes Cuban cigars are the best, sometimes they're not. I think the allure is that they are the birthplace of the handmade cigar. The first cigars were rolled in Cuba. Cuba is where these great legendary brands were born: Romeo Julieta, Monte Cristo, Cohiba. So it's much like the world of wine, with France being the birthplace. Sometimes French wines are the best in the world, but sometimes they're not. A lot of it also comes down to personal taste. I smoke cigars from all over the world. I love Cuban cigars, but I also love Dominican, Nicaraguan, Honduran. And I think like a lot of cigar smokers, if I had my choice, I would try to smoke them all. I wouldn't want to just smoke cigars from one country.
And if you took a blind taste test, could you tell the difference between a Cuban cigar and a Nicaraguan cigar, or from one from?
I probably could. Not always. There are some non-Cubans that taste Cubanesque. If you would, there are some non-Cubans that taste very different. The Cuban cigars have a certain style, so yeah, I could probably pick one out in a taste test.
Oh. So I want to hear about you, and how did you get into the cigar world? You've been there since 1994, been writing. I'm assuming that cigars have been part of your life before that. So what was the allure from the beginning, and how did you become this expert in cigars, and what was it?
I always liked to write. I was one of those kids who would sit there and write stories and try to write a movie script. I always knew I wanted to make my living as a writer from a very early age. I got a job as a business writer. I started experimenting with cigars. When I was in high school, I tried a cigar. Way too young to smoke one. Went to college, smoked some more. So cigars became a hobby for me, and then I found a job writing for a magazine, a small business magazine. One day, I saw an ad in the New York Times advertising a magazine I had never heard of called Cigar Aficionado, and I said, "What is this?" I found it, read it, fell in love with it. I said, "Well, this is really for me." And then I started pestering the people who were in charge to give me a story assignment. Started with a story assignment, and then some time went by, and they were hiring, and I got my foot in the door.
Do you remember that story?
Oh, very well. It was a story about CEOs who smoke. I said, the image of a cigar smoking powerhouse, the boss with a cigar. So I came up with a couple of examples. They liked the idea. They gave me some more examples. Turned into a story that was published in the Jack Nicholson issue in 1995.
I remember when Cigar Aficionado launched in the 90s, and I was invited, when I was working at an ad agency, I was invited to one of their big cigar lunches, which nobody had ever heard of. And it was a great way to get potential advertisers together all in one room and sort of experience the brand. And I was telling you beforehand, I'll share with the audience, is that I remember that after the cigar luncheon, I had a client meeting in the afternoon, and I didn't realize that I completely smelled of cigar smoke. But I think my client was okay with it. My client actually wanted to know more about it and where he can get an invitation next time. So How did the idea come about with Marvin Shanken when he started Cigar Aficionado? What was his mission going in? Where did he see the opportunity? And how has that mission changed over the last 20 years?
Marvin Shanken loved cigars from a very early age, and he had a magazine called Wine Spectator, which predates Cigar Aficionado by many, many years. And he used to write a column for Wine Spectator in every issue, and occasionally he would touch on the subject of cigars. And one day he said, I need to go to Cuba. He went to Cuba on a trip for a cover story for Wine Spectator. It was called The Allure of Cuban Cigars. Marvin spent about a week in Havana, touring factories, touring fields, smoking Cuban cigars. And as he told me, this predates my time at the magazine. As he told me, it predates Cigar Aficionado too. On the plane ride home, he said to himself, I need to have a cigar magazine before I die. I don't care if it loses money. I want to have a cigar magazine. He went back to his office, gathered his top executives, told them his plan, and they didn't like the idea at all. And he went against their wishes, said, I don't care. I don't care if I lose money. I'm doing this.
It was a passion play, essentially.
It was a passion play. And as he likes to say, it was a hit from the beginning. It made money from the beginning. He didn't do it to make money. He did it to express his one of his greatest hobbies. He loves wine. That's why he has Wine Spectator. He really loves cigars. He founded Cigar Aficionado, and he created something that's just really transformed the cigar business.
What did the cigar companies think at first?
They thought he was crazy too.
Yeah.
He had a meeting with one cigar company. They said, "Oh, there's no way this is going to last. There's no way it's going to last." They a lot of them told him he was making a mistake, but they said, "Okay, we'll check it out. We'll try to make it work." And now many of them who have been there from the beginning credit Marvin for what he did for really changing the business. I write about the cigar business, so I see the numbers. The cigar market was flat and dying before the advent of Cigar Aficionado. Before he made that magazine, we were looking at a market of about 100 million cigars imported a year from the big producing countries. The last numbers were about 320 million. And it went much higher than that. But not only did it go higher, we're selling a lot more cigars today than were ever sold before, but at a much higher price point. The last box of cigars I bought before joining the company, I bought for $35. You can't find a box of good cigars for $35 anymore. So cigars became a luxury product in a lot of reasons because of what Marvin did. They went from selling for a couple of cents or $1 or so a piece to now selling for $10, $15, $20, even $30 or $50 a piece.
And I remember in one issue, I think Marvin interviewed Fidel Castro. What was that a controversial issue, or what happened? How did that happen? How did he secure that meeting? It
was controversial. You can imagine in an industry where a lot of the people who make cigars have family origins dating back to the days of Cuba. There's some serious opinions about Fidel Castro in the cigar industry. Not many of them positive because of what he did in the Cuban cigar industry. However, Marvin saw Fidel as the image of the Cuban cigar, a fascinating person. It took a lot of effort to land that interview, and it was one of those epic interviews. Got the phone call in the middle of the night, come to the Palace of the Revolution, talking. Castro told amazing stories. You can still see the interview on our website. It's one of those things I reread every once in a while. It was a pretty amazing interview.
Did they keep in touch afterwards?
I think there was some contact once or twice afterwards, but they didn't become buddies or anything like that.
Yes. Smoking buddies. Before the show, I was talking about and setting up the show, the growth of the cigar industry, and it has been growing at a nice clip. Why do you think that is? Why do you think the market is growing?
Cigars are one of those affordable luxuries. I mentioned they have gone up in price, but they're still obtainable. Our cigar of the year retails for about $10. So the finest cigar of the year right now is according to our blind tastings is about $10. Just about everybody can afford $10. It's hard to afford the best bottle of wine. The finest car is out of my budget, finest houses. But cigars are an affordable luxury. So it's an attainable luxury. It's something that if you really want to experience something good, you could do it for a reasonable price. I think that's part of it. And cigars continue to sell well despite the best efforts of the government to make it a very difficult market. The U.S. government, the FDA, is making it very hard for cigar makers to make their product. So part of it is I don't really know why it's doing so well. It's doing well despite a lot of factors that are really in the way of a good market environment. The product level is very good. The cigars that you see on the market right now are exceptional, of exceptional quality, much better than they were like in the early days of the magazine when there was some rushing going on when the cigar boom was happening. It's a good time to be a cigar smoker.
So what about the premium cigar market? Is that also growing?
Oh, yeah. When I say cigar market, I'm sorry. Right. Yeah, I'm talking about
first I was talking about the whole – I mean, there are a lot of different – obviously levels of cigars.
Very good for you to bring that up. The entire cigar market, most cigars sold in America are cheap mass market machine-made cigars. Right. Things like Swisher Sweets, Dutch Masters. They sell many, many more of them because they're very easy to make, quick to make, and those are sold in convenience stores. And that's a multi-billion-dollar unit market. The market we talk about is premium handmade, and that's about a 330 million unit market or thereabouts.
So given the whole health kick that people are on and people are smoking less cigarettes, it seems to be going against the grain. You know, people still purchasing premium cigars. And maybe it is more of a feeling and an emotion by having these attainable luxuries, by celebrating different things with a premium cigar.
Well, I think people look upon cigars very differently than they look upon cigarettes. And they're made differently. I mean, they're both made with tobaccos, but they're made with different kinds of tobaccos. Cigarettes are made with added ammonia, which when combined with nicotine has your body boost the amount of nicotine that it absorbs. When a cigar maker makes a cigar, they do everything they can to get the ammonia out of the tobacco because that causes harshness of flavor. So it takes a lot longer to make a cigar than it does to make a cigarette, and they're made entirely differently. And the way they're smoked is different too. Cigarette smokers inhale the smoke. Right. So cigar smokers keep it in their mouth because you don't really have taste buds in your mouth. So
I think we're starting to see even a growth among millennials are starting to smoke more premium cigars. Are you seeing that too?
Yeah, the cigar market has back in the early days when the cigar market was dying, it was a very older audience, an entrenched audience that smoked the same cigar day in, day out. A cigar smoker would typically be somebody in their 60s perhaps, would buy a box of cigars, the same box, same size. Nowadays, it's gone into a business of singles. People go into a cigar store. They say, "What's new? What do you have?" Then they buy one of these, two of those, experiment a little bit. There's a lot more choices today than there used to be, and the average age is much younger. It's still it's never been for children. It's never going to be for children. But we see younger people at our events, and when we say younger in the premium cigar industry, guys in their 30s, sometimes guys in their late 20s. There's younger blood out there.
Right. What's interesting to me is Tampa, Florida has all these boutique operations where cigars are rolled by hand. So how did Tampa become sort of the U.S. center for cigar factories?
A long time ago, Tampa was the heartbeat of the cigar industry in the United States. Tampa's very close to Cuba. A lot of Cubans settled there and began making cigars. Even though when Cuban cigars were legal in the United States, most of the Cuban cigars smoked in the United States were made in the United States from Cuban tobacco. So Cuba would export the tobacco to a factory in the United States or to centers in the United States. And the cigars we made, they were called Clear Havanas, made in bond in the U.S. It started in Key West, and then hurricanes kind of devastated Key West, and the production shifted to Tampa. Tampa became the epicenter, especially the Tampa neighborhood known as Ybor City. Mm-hmm. Tons of cigar makers, many of Cuban heritage, some of Spanish, some of Italian heritage, rolled cigars, and it became just the center of cigar production. I think at one point there were 500 million cigars a year rolled in Tampa alone, all by hand.
How many come out of it now?
Not that many. There's little places left in Tampa that roll cigars. There are some headquarters there, like Arturo Fuente makes its headquarters there. Fuente is one of the leading producers of cigars in the world right now. They make their cigars in the Dominican Republic. There's still one company, J.C. Newman, that makes cigars in good quantities there, including some by hand. So they're kind of keeping that old tradition alive in Tampa. Tampa's also a great place to go just to enjoy a cigar and to see some of the old history down there and to enjoy the good weather.
Before we were talking about the government and some of the regulations, and I think the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, they have these new compliance rules on premium cigar makers. What are those rules, and how will those rules impact like these mom and pop cigar shops that are all over? They're the ones that are driving the business.
Absolutely. The rules are making it very, very hard to make a business in the world of cigars, especially on the cigar makers. Like if you and I wanted to create a cigar company, if we had wanted to do it 10 years ago, we would have just gotten together, found a cigar maker to make it, tried some blends, and then it would have been in our hands to see if that would work or not. Nowadays, we really couldn't do that without spending many, many thousands of dollars going through government regulation to get a cigar approved before it gets on the market. It's become a difficult market. It kind of locks in the established companies, makes it very hard for new blood to come in. And a lot of the cool things you see in the cigar business are being done by smaller cigar makers who are experimenting, going against tradition, coming out with non-traditional cigars, more exciting blends. So it's a shame that the government is putting these roadblocks in the way.
What is the FDA doing to
prohibitions on launching new product without approval. They wanted to put big warning labels on cigar boxes that would obscure the art, take up like 30% of the box. That battle has been won so far by the cigar industry. They want testing done on individual cigars, which is very hard because each one is rolled by hand, and they're not products of machines. They're not standardized like a machine-made product. It goes on and on. There's a lot of different restrictions, and a lot of that's aimed at cigarette production, but it gets filtered down to cigar production, and then it gets filtered down to handmade cigar production, which is just a different business in its entirety.
Were they trying to put premium cigars in a completely different category?
Well, the people who make premium cigars are seeking an exemption and hoping for relief from these restrictions, and the battle's been going on. There's no real relief in sight right now.
And every industry I see is being disrupted, and I have not read anything about the cigar industry being disrupted. Are there disruptors in the industry, and do you think it's ripe for disruption?
I think it's not ripe for disruption. The disruption is all from the U.S. government right now. If you asked 100 cigar makers 10 years ago what was their biggest problem, they would say it's the Internet. They were always worried about Internet price undercutting, cigars that were sold in a non-traditional manner that undercut the brick-and-mortar traditional shops. Ask them that same question today to a man or a woman, they would say it's the U.S. government. And a lot of it runs counter to the Trump administration, which is an anti-regulation administration. These roadblocks were put in by the previous administration. The Obama administration put the U.S. tobacco industry under the auspices of the FDA, and it's continued under the Trump administration. We're hoping for some relief.
Do you see any possibilities that there could be some new players on in the market?
You see one or two coming in despite the roadblocks. But most of the new players, I've been doing this for a long time, so new in my book might not be as new as most people would think. But if you go back just a couple of years, there's some younger people making some very cool cigars. There's a guy named Kyle Jealous, makes a cigar named Warped. He's a guy. He's about 30 years old and makes very interesting blends. He's a guy who drinks a lot of good wine, makes these very good cigars. He's one of our top cigars of the year. There's a very interesting fellow named Dion Giolito from Reno, Nevada. He's about 6'7". He's got big lamb chops like Elvis. Makes some of the best cigars you've ever had, called Illusione. Creative names, great cigars, very well balanced. And it's people like this that really give life to this industry and make for an interesting smoking product.
Has any new technology sort of made its way into the cigar market?
Very little. It's an industry that's sort of devoid of machinery and technology. It's most of these things are just made. It's handmade. The one thing the one bit of technology that you see is in some of the curing barns. The tobacco gets picked in the fields, hung in a barn, and it usually sits there for about 45 days, where it turns from green to brown and gets ready to be fermented. So it's a long process to get to the actual cigar. The cigars I was showing you before, they may have been planted as seeds, say 5 to 8 years ago. So it takes a long time to make a cigar. There's a little bit of technology you see in the barns now where they seal the barns and use what looks like air conditioning vents to circulate the air. That's about as high tech as it gets in the cigar business nowadays.
So the disruption is really new blends of tobacco.
Exactly, yeah. And sometimes you see people using tobaccos from regions that you haven't heard of before. There's some people growing tobacco in Pennsylvania, which is a little non-traditional. You see tobacco from places like Costa Rica. But for the most part, most of the cigars we smoke are made with tobaccos from Nicaragua, Dominican, Ecuador, Cuba, Honduras, 5 countries.
How do you think the cigar culture has changed from the 90s till today?
Cigar smoking in the 90s, it was very trendy. I think there were people who were smoking cigars to kind of have that look. Look, I'm smoking a cigar. It's the hot new thing. Cigar smoking today isn't trendy. It's people who are smoking cigars now are doing it because they love it. And you mentioned Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's still smoking cigars. He was just on our cover not too long ago.
He seems like he's always on the cover.
He set the record. He's been on our cover 4 times. Our readers love him. He's the ultimate cigar aficionado.
And he's a great interviewer too.
He's a fantastic interviewer. Absolutely.
Another thing about the cigar industry is it's notoriously a boys' club. And there are women who smoke cigars, but there doesn't seem to be a sufficient number to exert any significant influence in the marketplace. So what are you seeing when it comes to women and smoke cigars? Any kind of trend there?
Yeah, there are more and more women who smoke cigars. We see them at our big smokes. We hear from them in our reader letters. But more importantly, you see them in the business more so than ever before. It definitely was a boys' club back in the day. It was if you saw a cigar factory, a cigar brand, there was probably a man behind it making the cigar, working in the factory, selling the brand. That's not really the case nowadays. There's some very prominent women in the business. We hosted a panel on women in the cigar business at our most recent Big Smoke. People like Liana Fuente, Cynthia Fuente Suarez from Arturo Fuente, Inez Lorenzo Gomez from La Flor Dominicana, Lisette Perez Carrillo from EP Carrillo Cigar Company. These are all women who are either at the very top or right near the top of these cigar companies, making important decisions, making blends, going out to cigar shops. It's a new thing. It's a very important thing, and there are very strong women in this business who are making some excellent cigars. A very important part of it.
Does Cigar Aficionado cover these women in the magazine?
We do, and our readers do love it.
So what about millennials? We talked a little bit about before. It seems that the cigar bars and cigar lounges are becoming very popular, and they seem to be filled with millennials and younger people. Where do you see the growth in not only with millennials in cigars, but cigar lounges as well?
Cigar lounges are vital right now in the business. When I started in 1995, lounges weren't as big a deal because you could just smoke in more places. When I wanted to have a cigar in New York City in 1995, 96, I would just go to my local bar, and odds are the bar would allow cigar smoking. If it didn't, I would go to a different bar. The owners dictated where you could smoke. When non-smoking laws came into effect in New York, California, and then spread basically everywhere, cigar lounges became important. Cigar shops started to open up lounges, places where you could smoke. So cigar shops have transformed dramatically over the quarter century. I've been working at Cigar Aficionado. They went from places strictly to buy a cigar. You would give a cigar to somebody and they would get out. They became places now to gather and hang out and smoke.
In the back room?
In the back room, because in a lot of places that's your only choice for a place to smoke. So cigar lounges are incredibly important. I think our last survey of cigar shops that we did for our newsletter, Cigar Insider, our sister publication, showed that 90% of the cigar shops that we surveyed had a cigar lounge of some sort. That could be anything from a little table with a couple of chairs to something very grand and ornate where they actually have beverages and sometimes food service too.
So what about marketing cigars? What are the rules and regulations around marketing cigars online?
That's actually an interesting question. It's not strictly prohibited right now. I mean, if you're asking about marketing cigars, I would say the first choice would be marketing in Cigar Aficionado magazine. We do take cigar ads in our magazine. You see their cigar comes up with a presence on social media, to get in touch with fellow cigar smokers. And we also take ads on our cigar site, cigaraficionado.com. So there are companies that put warnings on the ads. There's a group of companies that are part of a group agreement to put voluntary warnings on the advertisements and also on the cigar boxes. But other than that, it's sort of up in the air right now. Well,
cigar sales, most of the cigar sales are at the cigar stores, but the online presence and online sales of cigars is growing. And I was just reading that the U.S. House of Representatives just passed a bill exempting premium cigars from selling online. They recognize premium cigars as sort of this unique tobacco category. And if that wasn't the case, that really could be disastrous to the cigar market.
Online sales are a very important part of the business right now, even for the premium category. We always have supported the brick and mortar, the local cigar shop. But the reality is not everybody has a great cigar shop within a comfortable distance of their home or office. So buying online has become a real factor in modern day America. You buy stuff online, whether it's groceries or whatever, and that includes cigars too. So even though we support the local brick and mortar, we understand the importance and the relevance of online buying. And some of these cigar shops have added online sales as part of their business too. It's not just a group of big companies. Big companies do dominate the online business, names like Cigars International, Famous, etc. But the smaller guys are getting in the act too.
How does social media play a role in this? Are there cigar influencers on social media?
There are, like any other industry, yeah. And it's a very visual medium and a medium that translates
it's a
well.
lifestyle, yeah.
It is, yeah. So you see a lot of it on Instagram, on Twitter, Facebook. Twitter is not as important as the other two right now, but I use all three to kind of keep in touch. And we play the game too. We're constantly getting the word out about our events, our magazines, whatever, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We've got quite the following there. It's another way to interact with our readers. And again, something that's completely different than what it was in the beginning of the magazine.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of refreshing as an editor. Back in the early days, you would create a magazine. It was a quarterly magazine back then. Send it out, and your feedback would be via letters mailed into the office. That changed where you get digital responses very fast. We would get responses at our events, but now we hear instantaneously via social media. You put out a post, people comment on it, we can communicate back and forth with them. So it's kind of refreshing. It also keeps you busier.
My final question, which I ask all my guests, is the luxury item question. I have a feeling I might know the answer, but we'll see. It could surprise me. So if you were stranded on a deserted island and you can have only one luxury item with you, and it can't be a form of transportation, obviously, and it can't be anything that requires mobile service, so you can't communicate with anybody. You're just there by yourself on this deserted island with one luxury item. I could say and it can't be a cigar, but I'll just leave it open to you. What would that one luxury item be?
This is a terribly hard question, I have to tell you. If it is a cigar, I would say it would be a box of pre-Castro Cuban cigars, something that's been sitting around and aging since 1959. It's in perfect condition, and that way I could enjoy those cigars in my moments of quiet and solitude on that deserted island, hopefully in the shade under a nice palm tree if that exists.
You'd probably want a big box so you can – I don't know how long it would last, but I don't know if you would smoke each cigar in one sitting, but I think you would want to try and extend that pleasure as long as you can. David, thank you so much. Where can people learn about Cigar Aficionado?
Oh, please come see us at cigaraficionado.com. We update the site every day. Would love to have you say hi to us there.
When is the big smoke, the next one?
The next one is April 3rd and 4th in Hollywood, Florida. It's Big Smoke meets Whiskey Fest, two worlds kind of coming together.
Ever thought about expanding internationally?
We've been asked that question an awful lot. The question of the Cubans comes up, and that becomes a bit of a difficulty.
Right.
So we have not had a big smoke outside the U.S. I look forward to the day when we could actually do that. And then we have our big one coming up in Las Vegas, Nevada in November. That's the biggest big smoke we throw all year.
Where is that being held in Las Vegas?
At the Mirage in Las Vegas.
Mirage. Okay, great. David, thank you so much. You've been a great guest.
Thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it.
That's it for this episode of the Luxury Item Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this useful and entertaining, I would be really grateful if you can share it with a friend or colleague. I would love it if you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other listeners find us. The Luxury Item Podcast is a production of Silvertone Consulting. I'm your host, Scott Kerr. Until next time.